One thing that's really important in language learning, really, really important, and that will determine if you succeed or fail for the most part, unless you have someone guiding you that really knows what they're doing. If you have that, then uh, it doesn't matter. But if you don't, you need this, right? You need to be able to think for yourself. And more specifically, and this applies not only to language learning, this applies to everything, right? You need to be able to think critically, think of, think by yourself, think specifically why and for what you're doing what you're doing, to be so that you're able to determine if something's worth doing or not, or how much of it you should do, and basically to be able to uh, design your own strategy and tactics, and to see, to identify if it's working or not, right? You need to be able to think like that. And when it comes to language learning, it's very simple. You need to ask yourself, what am I doing this for, right? What's the end goal? And depends on the person. Some people want to achieve other things, they have different goals. But for most people learning a foreign language, at least the people I'm in touch with, the people who ask me for help, or who watch my videos, or get my courses, etc. Most people want to be able to understand the language, and you want to be able to speak. Okay, there are some people who want to be able to read whatever philosophy book in the original language, whatever. That's a very tiny minority, all right? Most people want to be able to understand native speakers and speak the language fluently. That's the goal. And if that's the goal, everything that you're doing should be something that takes you closer to those two goals, understanding and speaking, as fast as possible. And if it's not doing that, then it's a waste of time, or it's something else. It's a distraction. It's an app that's a game disguised as learning, and you're pretending to learn, but you're just lying to yourself. But the thinking critically and being able to tell if how much of something you should do is something that applies also to, it's something that's really important when it comes to um, knowing how much of, but because you can always do too much of a good thing, right? So if you've got an hour a day of learning time, there's a you have to make some decisions, like what are you going to spend that hour doing. The different exercises you can do, and if you spend all of the hour doing one thing, that's, well, then you don't get to do a bunch of other things, right? So how much of each thing you should do? And I get a lot of these questions of, like, I'm doing this 20 minutes of this, 20 minutes of that, is this good? And the answer is always, it really depends. Like, what's your current level? What's your next, what's the main thing you want to improve at? What's the end goal? What's the next uh, goalpost? Like, what are you trying to achieve here? Because if you tell me you don't understand anything, maybe it doesn't make sense to do a lot of retrieval practice. For example, doesn't make sense to try to translate sentences. You spend most of your time translating sentences from English into the target language and then checking. That's very slow. It's an excellent exercise to develop fluency and to learn to think in the language better, but it's also really slow, and you don't get exposed to that much language by doing that. So if your goal is to, like, learn the basics of the language and you're starting from scratch, maybe that's not the thing you should be doing. Or at least that's not the thing you should spend most of your time doing. If instead you understand the language well, and you but you can't speak very much, so you want to be able to think faster in the language, and you want to get rid of that fear of speaking, then yes, it absolutely makes sense to do a lot more of this, a lot more of trying to speak the language. You translate sentences into the target language and check if you say it correctly or not, or you do other kind of speaking exercises instead of continuing to do the stuff that helped you understand the language better but didn't help you speak better. Because if you continue doing the things that helped you get good at understanding but not speaking, you will continue to improve your ability to understand, which is not the main problem now, right? So it's like having a car that's got a flat tire and also an empty gas tank, and you fill the gas tank and the tire is still flat and the tank is full, and you keep going back to the gas station and you bring more gas. I don't know why I'm saying gas, petrol, British English, but yeah, you get what I'm saying. Like you should fix all the problems, like not just focus on one thing and just continue doing that no matter what. Like there's no one size fits all solution, and there's also no one size fits all learning plan. Right? There are specific solutions for specific problems. You lack vocab, okay, then memorize vocab with mnemonics, and you uh, review a lot of sentences over and over until you learn enough vocab, and then you will understand more. If you have a fluency problem, then you do a bunch of fluency uh, exercises, retrieval practice, shadowing, etc. But always think of what exactly you're trying to accomplish. What's the problem you're trying to solve, right? And if the question is, and I get this question a lot, like when should I move on to the next exercise? Like how much of this should I do? Like I'm translating from English into Spanish, and I'm getting almost all of them 100% correct, but I'm still like not sure if I should move on to the next. Why are you learning those particular sentences? If those are sentences that you want to be able to say really often, then you should get really, really good at translating into the target language, and just it shouldn't take you time. You should just read a sentence in English and instantly say it in Spanish or whatever language you're learning, and say the sentence. You should be able to say it relatively, basically flawlessly, like 100% correct. That's what you want to. That's what you want to do if those are sentences you want to be able to then use in conversation often. Those are key sentences. But if you just learn in vocabulary, lists of verbs that you learn in the most common 300 verbs, whatever, you don't need to use most of those in daily conversation. Most of those you just want to be able to understand, because you don't use, well, most people don't use those that kind of verbs in regular conversation. You just want to be able to understand them when you hear them, so you can understand native speaker content. So just being able to understand, which is much easier than being able to retrieve and use those fluently and with like correct grammatical structures. Just being able to understand it comes much sooner. It's much easier. So for vocabulary in general, that's the goal. Why? Because if you spend way more time than necessary uh, doing retrieval practice or things like that with those verbs, and maybe eventually you want to do that, but if you spend a lot of time doing that with verbs that a list of verbs, for example, that you will not use in uh, in conversation, that's a waste of time. Maybe it's not a waste of time if you want to get to a C1 level with your speaking skills, and but that's something else. But if your goal is to understand and speak, you need to be able to think why you're doing what you're doing and what you're doing it for, and that determines how much of it you should do. And sometimes good enough is like good is better than perfect, right? Good is like perfectionism wants, like if you try to get perfect at 100 random sentences, and you spend 100 hours learning those 100 random sentences till perfection, that's much worse than learning 20 times the amount of sentences with, and you're able to say them but with some mistakes. You get what I'm saying? So it's there's always trade-offs, and you should learn to recognize how much of each thing you should do. Like if you can use it, then it's better than, like if you can use a bunch of, like a lot of sentences, it's much better than knowing a few sentences perfectly. And when it comes to comprehension, understanding a lot of words is better than knowing a few very, like, perfectly. So spend time, like spend a lot of time learning the things that are really high frequency and you really need to be able to use, but don't spend the same amount of time for vocab lists, for example, which vocab lists that you won't use. So you should learn to distinguish what do you need, like what do you need to understand, and what do you need to speak to be able to, what do you need to be able to say, and what do you need, and then what do you need to be able to say really, really well. There are distinctions there, right? Some words, if you just more or less, if you can more or less recognize them, that's good enough. Some words. Other words, you need to know them perfectly. Some sentences, you need to be able to say them, even if it's 50% wrong, but you're able to communicate. While some other sentences that are much more crucial, much more frequent and important, you need to be able to say them perfectly. So you should always think of the materials, the sentences, and the vocab. Why are you learning it? What are you learning it for? And then, depending on how important it is, you spend more or less time learning that thing. All right. It's, I know it's not easy to, at first, to figure that out. Like, do I really need this? So how much do I need this? It's not a yes or no question, right? It's how much do I need to know this? Like, how well do I need to know this? You need to learn. That's a skill. You need to learn that, and I can help you with that, but it really depends on you again, because something that's really important and really high frequency for me might be completely useless for you, right? So the stuff you talk about is not the stuff I talk about. So you need to learn to identify, to put the sentences and the words in categories of importance, right? And then allocate the right amount of time and effort into each and one of those.